Hi, Kendall.
Hi, Josh. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being a part of this. I'm eager to hear your story, and then especially to learn a little bit more about your line of work and how your story can be kind of like infused into that. It's rare that I get like professionals on this show. We
Mm,
get a few, but usually because this is hospitality focused, it's usually a lot of like bartenders, bar owners, and stuff like this that come on the show. So I'm really eager to kind of like hear a little bit more of your background and how you kind of like see substance abuse and consumption playing out in this kind of like current year.
yeah, definitely. So, as you mentioned, I'm a professional. I'm a licensed therapist in New York and New Jersey. So, I am close to 7 years sober.
Congrats.
Um, Thank you. Yeah, I started drinking alcoholically like right when I entered college. I think, well, I know that I dealt with a lot of underlying mental health issues more related to anxiety. And the way I dealt with that was through drinking. And when I went for college, that's a really anxiety producing time. I think for a lot of young adults, you're away from home for the first time. You're trying to figure out what your life is going to look like at the age of 18, which is a tall order. And so, like I said, I dealt with that through drinking, with my social anxiety, with the uncertainty of life. It started off fun and partying and um, kind of transformed into feeling like, I think I had so much anxiety that I struggled to be who I really was. I was so, what's the word? Like almost filtered. I was scared that if I showed who I really was, that people wouldn't accept me. And so when I drank, I felt less inhibited. I felt like I could be who I really was, and people seemed to like me. So it went from just drinking at parties to now, okay, I'm getting lunch with somebody new today who I don't know. I don't know them all that well. They don't know me all that well. So I'm going to have a shot or two before I go out to lunch, which then progressed even further to having a shot or two before really doing just about anything to feel more comfortable in my own skin, which then just became a full on dependency of drinking every day, not going to classes. College was really, really challenging for me because of that. I took a medical leave, I transferred schools. I somehow managed to get by. And when I did, um, right when I graduated, I ended up going to rehab. And I'm so thankful that I did because since then I've been sober. Um, and I think what made college so hard and the reason why I love working with young adults in particular is because the drinking culture is just so huge. And how does a 19-year-old stop drinking or moderate their use when you're in an environment where partying is just par for the course? And so when I did go to rehab, when I did get sober, even when I was in college, I majored in psychology, thinking, well, one day, like I'm really struggling right now, but one day I have some hope that I'm going to get better. And when I do, I want to be able to help people who are like me. And somehow that happened. I'm glad that I had that little sliver of hope, even though I was really struggling a lot. And when I got out of rehab, I started working in the field of therapy. I volunteered at a foster care center. I worked with children with autism. And I would say, I think 2 years later, I entered grad school. And that was in 2020. And now I am a fully licensed therapist and I own my own practice. And like I said before, my goal is to help other young adults who are either struggling with sobriety, who are sober curious, and then also just people who have underlying mental health issues like anxiety or body image concerns and are maybe engaging in negative behaviors to avoid those feelings.
Yeah, how do you bring that up, or what's the kind of like course of action and conversation when you're you know learning someone of someone might enter thinking their only problem, let's call it, is substance
Mm-hmm.
abuse, but there's often something like underlying there. Like how do you help one discover that they might be medicating for another issue with alcohol instead of just alcohol being the kind of like sole provider of the problem?
It's a really good question. And I am a firm believer that substances and substance abuse is really a symptom of something greater. It's a symptom that then becomes the main problem. Um, I actually don't have to do too much work in helping my clients to see that there's something greater because if they're willing to give up the substance, they'll quickly find out why it was so hard to give it up in the first place. Whether it's anxiety, whether they were feeling kind of depressed, whether they have a disordered eating that they've kind of been covering up as well. Once you give up the substance, which is the thing that's been helping you to get by in one form or another, there's a lot of free space to then discover like what else is happening inside, but you can't really figure that out while you're using. So what I do is help my clients gain insight. When they stop using their substances, we keep track of their emotions on a day-to-day basis. How are they feeling? What's their level of anxiety on a scale of 1 to 10? And what's triggering these strong emotions? When are they feeling cravings for using? Because usually if you're feeling a craving, you're feeling something else deep inside that you're wanting to avoid. And that's why we turn to substances.
Yeah. I I feel like when I made that decision to stop drinking, like that awareness of everything else around me is what was so crucial. Because I had taken months off before, but just like went back to it, like maybe
Mm-hmm.
harder than I had left it. But in 2017, when I stopped, like I actually kind of like took that inventory of myself, and I was like, how do I feel as a
Mm-hmm.
result of this? And it was the first time that I had ever kind of like put it in question of just like, well, why am I drinking? And then it just kind of like became the chase of all of those different things. Like early on in my sobriety, I remember talking to somebody and thinking about it as, I was using drinking as a way of kind of like avoiding some things. And the things that I wanted to avoid, I started seeing as like books on a shelf. And then with the removal of alcohol, I was able to start pulling the books off, reading them, understanding that they weren't so scary that I needed to kind of like tuck them and hide them away anymore. How do
I
you
love that metaphor
Yeah, it was really helpful for me because I was just like, I was thinking like, what am I avoiding? Because at first, like, it felt like I was just like avoiding life. And
because you avoid so much you don't even recognize you're doing it anymore. It's just automatic.
yeah, it was like the trigger to want to drink to avoid kicked in before I was even aware of like what I was trying to avoid.
Yeah. So insight's really important. And that's why like when I'm working with a client who's wanting to work on sobriety, giving up the substance is the very first step. Um, After that, like if you're giving something up, you need to feel like you're also gaining something. And I was actually just talking about this with a client this morning that why would you give something up when you feel, well, what am I going to really get from this? And that's why I kept drinking for as long as I did because I felt if I stop drinking, I'm going to lose my social life. I'm not going to go out anymore. I'm going to be a hermit. That's what it really felt like. I was giving up life. Even though I wasn't happy in my life, I didn't want to give up any social interactions ever. So it's about learning to replace one thing with another. And unfortunately, nothing's going to feel as good as the substance that you've been dependent on because of the dopamine levels that it just hits for you. But what you'll get in return is something so much deeper and will last so much longer than a quick hit of dopamine. So if you are giving up substances, it's how do you now have fun? How do you have a social life without those things? Can you? And what other things bring you happiness and joy aside from just drinking? What are hobbies you had as a kid that maybe dropped off because all you've been doing lately is partying? What are other aspects of you that maybe you don't even really know yet? So in a lot of ways it's a self-discovery and it can be a really exciting time. Like I've discovered so many more hobbies and things about myself as a sober woman than when I was drinking because all I had to do when I was drinking was pick up a drink.
How do you help someone recognize those things as gifts? Because drinking is such a that like quick hit, everything else seems to come a little bit slower. How do you work with somebody to kind of like deal with that slow ebb and flow of time and the gifts that are received during that.
It is slower, that is for sure. But I think there's also pride that a person can have in the little accomplishments that maybe they couldn't do while, like, I'm trying to think of an example. The first time I went on a date sober, um, that was really, really hard. But I did feel a lot of pride in myself and feeling like, wow, I got through that. And so some of it is feeling like learning to have self compassion and realizing that things are going to be hard and taking pride in them. And also realizing that the more you do them, the more you do the things that you were avoiding for so long, the less scary they become. And so, yeah, it takes time to get there, but the more you do them, the better they're going to be. And you'll start to see changes in your life. Like, yes, maybe you had a more bustling social life while you were using, but how deep were those relationships? And did it also cause problems in other relationships that you had? Um, so the quantity of things might be less. You're not going to get that quick shot of dopamine. You're not going to have an easy, like, I'm just going to go out to a bar type of night. However, the quality of them becomes a lot deeper. And so it's starting to reframe a person's thinking and realizing, okay, maybe you only went out with friends once this week. However, what was the quality of that time going out with your friends? Did you Were you vulnerable with them? Were they vulnerable with you? Do you feel connected to them? You might find you actually feel a lot less lonely when you're sober and connecting with people than going out every single night, but not really getting deep with anybody.
Yeah, I understand that. I feel like, especially with partying, you feel like you have to hit that level every single time. And if like the
Hmm.
next time that you're out with folks and it's not as like fun or chaotic or energetic, then it's like, was that fun if I didn't like push it to the extreme every single time?
Yeah, and then like read maybe imagining what the word fun means. Um, there's a lot of pressure, I think, and like social stigma when it comes to like partying or sobriety. And I think we picture like fun is going out to a bar, going out to a club. Um, I have a lot of fun in my life. And I guess for some people, it might not seem fun since I'm not going out. But are you living your life for other people or are you living it for you? And trying to like redirect. Well, actually, I had a lot of fun going and playing pickleball with people. Um, and if that's what's, you know, identifying what's fun in a different way.
What are some of the gifts that you've received in
Oh
your seven
gosh,
years?
so many. I was going nowhere with my life when I was drinking. I couldn't progress in any way, shape, or form. Um, I wouldn't have any of the things that I have today if I were still drinking. For one, I'm married, and I met my husband before I got sober, but and he was very supportive. But that there's no way that would have lasted or gone to this point. I would have a really horrible relationship with my family. But the things that I did gain, okay, I gained a really healthy marriage. I've gained really wonderful friendships and friendships that I never had the capacity for when I was drinking because they're so deep and I can truly be myself. When I got sober, I learned to live a life of honesty and authenticity. I had to because when you're using, or at least when I was lying so much to other people, and then I ended up lying to myself. I didn't know who I was. I was completely lost. And now to counteract that, to stay sober, I have to be honest. And in being honest, I'm vulnerable, which allows me to form really deep connections with people. Um, and it allows me to feel confident in who I am because I can show up as I am. And for the most part, in a lot of times, I'm accepted. And I realize I don't have to feel shame. And when I'm not accepted, well, those people probably aren't for me. But I've built up so much confidence in my sobriety, and that is truly a gift. I've also opened up my own practice. I'm a therapist. I was able to move out of home. I can afford to live my life independently. Um, I started playing tennis again, which I really love. And in college, I tried to play on the team, and I ended up drinking before going to practices and got cut. And now I really get enjoyment from it again. Um, the list is near endless, the gifts that I have received or that I have worked for.
I, that's amazing. That's so great to hear.
Thank you.
How do you have the conversation with people that are afraid to lose those around them that they think are friends, but are just a part of the situation? Because I felt like I was afraid of that, especially because I was a bartender, and I put the term friend on everyone, even if they were just like acquaintance or close or someone in the next bar stool. So when I started seeing folks like dropping off, I thought it was a me problem and not the company that I keep. How would you talk to somebody who's fearful about losing people, who's maybe not opened their eyes yet to knowing that those that stick around are those that are supposed to be there?
It is a difficult conversation. And as a therapist, I try to be as authentic in the therapy room as I am in my day to day. And that means sometimes sharing tough truths, which is that, yes, that will happen, most likely. Um, and I validate the feelings that they're having, which is, it's really hard. That's hard to watch. And it's hard to be a part of. And I can really relate to that. Um, I think what we can really start to talk about is when we are focused a lot on people leaving us, what we're not really focused on is how much we actually enjoy those people in our lives. What do they do for us? What do they bring to the table as far as friendships, as far as a friendship goes? And so if you start noticing people leaving your life, well, what were they bringing for you? Like, were they very supportive? Were they always a phone call away? Did they initiate hanging out with you? Or were they just someone that hit you up when they wanted to go out and get drunk? And if that's your answer, well, you need to think about what type of friendships you're worthy of. And realistically, maybe you don't think that you're worthy of that deep of friendships because of your history with substances, and there's usually a lot of shame attached to that. But I would urge you to hold on and trust me when I say that you are taking the right steps and you're going to meet your best friends for life because you're going to meet them where you're at and you'll meet them where they're at. Um, it will take time to get there. But again, the friends that are leaving your life, were they really adding much to it to begin with, or were they really enabling you to keep using?
Kendall, I've learned so much more about myself by having this podcast and having conversations with folks and their path and their journey. And a lot of them have kind of like helped to provide like the vocabulary and the words and the way that I talk about my own sobriety now. What have you learned about yourself through your client work?
Oh my gosh, I learned so much, and it's not something that I thought I would gain as a therapist. Um, but my clients teach me so much about resilience. Um, when I am speaking with a client and they're going through a particularly challenging time, and they speak to me about how it's tough, but they're letting themselves sit in the feeling, or life stinks, but they can see how maybe one day this will actually be a silver lining. That is beautiful to listen to. And it makes me think about my own struggles and things going on in my own life and how, like, if this person I just spoke to can see a silver lining in something so terrible, then I certainly can too. I learn a lot of courage, resilience, um, from my clients. And sometimes it's hard to keep my mouth shut because I want to be like, oh my gosh, me too. Or that relates to this thing, but I have to, unless I feel it's going to be beneficial to them to share that. But um, I've learned about, I mean, for one thing, it helps me stay really grateful in my recovery. Um, to work with people who are very early on in their recovery and see their eyes open up when they have a success or when they get it or when they relapse, it keeps me humble. It reminds me where I came from, and it also makes me feel really connected to people as a whole. Like, I went through that and they're going through that, and we're all kind of connected in a lot more ways than we imagine. Like, we're all people at the end of the day, and we all have our challenges. And I'm just so grateful that I have this role where I can sit here and listen to them and offer any insights.
Do you feel like you wear your sobriety differently now than you have through the different phases? 'Cause I feel like I'm
Mm-hmm.
lucky also through this podcast to have the account to be able to go back and listen to the way that I was talking about my sobriety, and it just feels like every year I'm a different on a different plane of it, and even the way that I describe it is different. Like, how are you wearing your sobriety now, and how would compare that to where you were, like, call it like 4 years ago?
I wear it with pride, straight up pride. When I was newly sober, maybe my first year or two even, I wore it with shame. I felt that if I told people I was sober, it meant that I failed,
Hmm.
that I was weak, that I couldn't handle substances, and that it meant I had baggage. And now I have really reframed that. I think through being vulnerable and authentic and realizing that the more I shared about my sobriety, the more reinforcement I got and positive reactions, which allowed me to feel less shame. And I really think to combat shame, you have to be authentic and put yourself out there in a safe space. So that way you start to learn that the thing you're shameful about, no one else is feeling that way about you. And so now when I tell people I'm sober, I feel pride in that. Like, I did it. And I have a long life left to go. It's a recovery, not a finish line. Um, but to me, it means that I had enough insight and wherewithal to realize that something wasn't working for me. And I worked really, really hard to get my life back on track. And that is a strength. To me, that's resilience. That is courage. That's bravery. It's nothing but strength. And I love to share about it because I know there are people out there who feel shame still. Um, and I know what that was like. And that's partly why I'm here speaking about it and why I'm putting myself out there so much. Because when I was 19 and I was starting to recognize that I was an alcoholic, I didn't know anyone else who was kind of around my age, who had a similar background or whatever, who was also going through it or who was sober and made it look like doable for me. Um, and so, yeah, I have pride and I want to share it.
I feel like mindset changes so much throughout the different phases of sobriety as well, because I used to view time as a burden. I was so afraid of what forever could mean. And
Oh,
then
yeah.
I was able to kind of like lock into it's actually a benefit. And instead of like casting my gaze like so far out trying to figure out like who I was going to be at X time, I was able to kind of like pull back and just be like, who are you right now? Who were you a year ago? And like be able to show yourself like, who did I become through that year, and leave the mystery of who I might be to the future instead of trying to focus on like, oh man, I'm quitting forever. Well, what does forever even mean? It's like, well, you don't have forever until you get there. Like, you've got right now. Like, it's so tough to kind of like talk to some people about like how to stay in the moment when you're so fearful of what the next thing that's going to happen is going to be.
Yeah, getting sober really keeps you grounded. If you, and I say this to almost all my clients, not just the ones who are struggling with substance abuse, but if you look at anything in terms of forever, it would be really overwhelming and no one would want to start anything. Um, it's too big a leap to go from I like doing this thing to now I'm never ever doing it again. Instead, feeling like, do I want to be doing this thing today? Is it going to impact my life negatively? And the answer is yes. Well, then today I'm not going to do that thing. Maybe not tomorrow either. Or I don't plan on it next week, but who knows? And it's not like leaving the door open. It's not saying, well, maybe I'll drink tomorrow, but it's not contributing to this all or nothing mindset, which a lot of people with substance abuse issues have, of like when they go out and they go in, they go all in. And it doesn't, there needs to be some gray area, because when we think in black and white, we're likely to just give up on something and think it's too much. So just for today, and that's like the slogan that you hear a lot, but just for today, I'm not having a drink or I'm not using drugs.
I think that was the big realization for me in that last sober October I did, the one that stuck, is that before I was ticking boxes. I was so aware of the days that I was like able to strike off the calendar that I didn't
Mm.
drink, that I wasn't ticking a day and then asking myself, how do I feel today? And then when I started doing that, because I even quit with the intention of going back to it, but
Mm.
when I became more aware of how I was evolving and the person that I was becoming in the absence of alcohol, I learned that, those little gifts start to arrive. And I was like, I feel so good today. It's possible that I could feel better tomorrow. Like I know what yesterday feels like. There's no way I want to
That's a gift.
go
That's
back.
a really good point. It's keeping track of even just how you're feeling on a day to day. And likely you're going to feel a lot better on a day that you're sober than on a day when you wake up really, really hungover and your life feels like it's in shambles.
I feel like sobriety comes with that generic term sometimes of I'm doing the work. I'm just working on it. I'm working on myself. Can you define the work in some regard for folks to kind of like know like what will I be doing day to day to keep myself better?
Wow. Well, there can be a lot to that. I think doing the work means taking care of yourself. And what that looks like can be different from person to person. It's not like I'm going to take a bubble bath. It can be, but that's kind of the stereotypical self-care. But maybe for a lot of people, it's seeing their therapist once a week. It's so to help keep them honest, to help keep them aware of what's going on internally. Maybe it's journaling every day, keeping track of your own emotions or what's going on in your mind, so you're aware when you're feeling vulnerable one day and you feel then a craving to drink something, you can recognize, oh, that's because I'm feeling lonely today. So it's a lot of self awareness and finding ways to keep you self aware. And one way to really be not self aware is to use substances. Um, so finding ways to stay self aware, finding ways to also enjoy life, because life can't be all work. If it is, that's the all or nothing again of like, I'm either working and doing life perfectly or I'm out and I'm drinking and using. So, how can you also add some fun into your life? Maybe it's going to museums, going to the movies, joining a book club, joining a sports team, joining a new social group. They have so many apps these days with different social organizations that you can join that don't surround around drinking. Um, so it's about finding balance where you're taking care of yourself, you're making sure you have insight, and you're also finding time for fun and you're nurturing your relationships. And it can seem like a lot at first, especially for someone who's been using for a long time because you've been avoiding all of that. Um, but over time, it starts to become more natural. It starts to become less overwhelming and less anxiety producing.
Somebody who has a substance abuse issue can oftentimes be a villain in somebody else's story.
Mm-hmm.
How do you deal with that individual that feels like they don't deserve to get better?
Yeah, I see that a lot. Um, it really comes to tackling shame and self forgiveness and compassion. And forgiving yourself is not about letting it go and excusing it. You can have two things exist that are seemingly opposite. Like you can say, I did this bad thing. And also, and you include the and in there, I was really not doing well and I was sick and I don't want this to happen again. So you can take accountability and you can also understand the context of it. And so I do a lot of that work with my clients is taking accountability while also offering self-forgiveness. And that is kind of, that's a dialect, which I use in DBT, dialectical behavior therapy. Learning to forgive while also accepting kind of what happened. And I know in AA and a lot of groups, it's Taking accountability means offering amends or speaking amends with people. And that can be really cathartic to kind of go back to somebody. And I'm not saying you have to join an AA program or anything like that, but if you're really holding on to a lot of shame about something, you can go to whatever person it is and speak and not be like, yo, I'm sorry. But hey, this is what was going on in my life. And I understand that I hurt you. And if there's anything I can do to ever make it up for you, let me know. And that person might not forgive you. They don't have to. Just because you go and apologize and make an amends doesn't mean everything's righted, but you can at least feel like you then did the right thing. Um, we're not in control of other people's stories or narratives or behaviors. We're really not. And so it's learning then what you are in control of and feeling good about those things, feeling good about how you behave and what you do moving forward.
I Earlier on you were talking about some of the triggers of how to pay attention to, of like when would I usually drink, or if this time arrives I would usually have a drink here. How do you I feel like, especially like what's happening across the world, it seems, is how do you avoid triggers when the whole world feels like a bear trap?
What a question. At the end of the day, it's not about avoiding triggers because you can't. Like you said, the whole world is a trigger at this point. In the very, very beginning of a person's recovery, maybe you can avoid certain triggers. For instance, if it's inpatient, I went to rehab for 30 days. At that rehab, there was no substances around me whatsoever. There was no temptation to go out. I didn't even have my phone, so I couldn't even look on Instagram and compare what I was doing to other people. I was pretty trigger free, but that's temporary. When I came out of rehab and I went to New York City, I mean, there's a liquor store and a bar on every block. So it wasn't about avoiding that, or else I'd have to be walking down the streets with a blindfold. Um, Instead, it's learning to first identify what they are, because knowledge is power. When you know what your triggers are, you'll be less taken aback when they come at you. Um, like if you are going to a birthday party and you expect there to not be drinking for whatever reason, and all of a sudden there's alcohol there, you're going to feel less prepared to say no and be like kind of flustered. But if you go into a situation realizing there's probably going to be alcohol there, this is what I'm going to say, this is how I'm going to handle it, then you're prepared. You can even have an exit strategy. So once you recognize these are the things that might trigger me or might cause cravings, then you can prepare for them. Um, some things you can't fully prepare for. You can't know everything that's going to happen. And so then that is also learning to kind of sit in discomfort. It's a big part of early recovery. You're going to feel uncomfortable, maybe a lot of the time in the beginning. And discomfort isn't going to kill you. It stinks. We don't want to feel uncomfortable, but you will learn that you will get through it. There's studies that show that really strong emotions, they peak at about 90 seconds. After those 90 seconds are up, the emotional reaction starts to decrease. So if we can kind of like get through that strong wave of emotion and discomfort, we have knowledge that on the other side, it will dissipate.
I was really fortunate to find running when I got sober, and it became that kind of like one-to-one recognition point that I had with my sobriety. And it's like, it's also another thing that's kind of like difficult to sell to someone because everyone's like, oh, I see you running and it looks so great, but every time I do it, like it hurts, like it's not fun, like when does it get good? And I have a really tough time being like, it doesn't get good. It gets easy, but it's like it gets easier, but it never gets easy, sort of thing. But like there are like such highs that come with running, of like being really proud of myself, of like knowing that I was better today than I was like yesterday. Where else can you send folks when they're looking for that sort of like replacement, or what do I do with my time? Because you really can fill a lot of time drinking. You can bring drinking into places where there's not drinking, and you can really like spread the wealth everywhere. When you start pulling that back, like what are people looking to find themselves, to find joy, to find an alternative?
Yeah, so filling your time is definitely one thing. I think finding hobbies and things that make you feel good are huge because you do need a replacement. At the same time, you can't be busy 24 hours a day. So, in addition to finding hobbies, you also need to start to learn to, like I was saying before, sit in discomfort and how to just kind of sit still. Um, as far as hobbies and things go, um, you are like rediscovering yourself when you're newly sober. So I will, I have like a big list of activities in one of my like workbooks, and we will go through that list and they will check off everything on there that seems at all interesting to them. We will then refine that list and we'll look, especially if someone's in New York City, because that's where I'm located, there's so much available to you. We'll go online and see what clubs there are. We'll see if there's any classes that a person can take and start signing up for things, or volunteering your time. I think volunteering is a really great way because it gets you out of your own head and out of the poor me, and it creates connection with other people and allows comparison in a positive way of like, wow, I my life really actually has some like good things to it. So doing a deep dive into and trying out all sorts of different hobbies and activities. And it can be fun. I did trapeze in my first year of sobriety. I never thought I would do that. And it was so cool. Um, there's a big world out there. And so it's just kind of figuring that out. And I would also say community is huge. You can't you're not going to get very far doing anything alone. I mean, we are the most social species there is out there. That's how we've made it this far as a human race. Um, we need people and we need to not feel alone. And we need people that are supportive. I'm not saying you have to have all sober friends, but it's helpful to have at least one who gets what it's like going to a place and not being able to participate in drinking or whatever it is. Um, and so when you have your downtime at the end of the day and you're feeling not great, call up that friend or call up a friend.
That's great because especially in the early decision to remove alcohol, like it feels like you're the only person it's ever happened to. Like you really do
Yeah,
feel so alone in that decision.
yes, you do. And lately, there's a lot more available as far as um, like nightlife and going out where there's NA options. Um, there are different like social groups and activities that exist, or even non-alcoholic bars that are around where you can go and meet other people who are in a similar boat as you. There's more available.
Definitely. It's a great time for, those options and especially with how close I am to like the hospitality roles, like even watching what has been available in a can or a bottle over like the past 5 years has really been like insane.
Absolutely. When I first got sober, and look, this is only almost 7 years, so not that in a very short amount of time, it has like exploded the NA market. Because when I was first sober, I think they had O'Doul's, and I
Mm,
think they had just come out with maybe Heineken Zero. That was it. And
yeah.
now I can go almost anywhere, and they either have an NA beer option or a mocktail list, and that feels so inclusive. Like I don't think restaurants and bars understand how much it makes my entire night when I see a mocktail list.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that can cause like a lot of anxiety in folks as well. Like if it's already difficult to talk to a bartender about what you want if you don't know what's behind the bar, if you don't know like what
Yeah,
the options are. That's what's really great about a cocktail list is that something has a name, it has a price, it usually tells you like what it's going to taste like. If you have to feel anxious about going out, walk into a crowded room, make your way to the bar, stand to the bartender, and they say, "What do you want? What do you have without alcohol?" I don't know. What I can make you something. What do you usually like? Like all of that, it can be
such a
really
good
triggering
point.
and make somebody like if I walked in there and I usually drink gin and tonics and I'm trying not to drink and all of that happens to me, it's much easier to just go, just give me a gin and tonic, and then I'm back and I'm at square one
That's
again.
a really, really good point.
where it'd be so much easier if they just had the offering and I could order it the same way I do a foolproof drink.
Yeah. And like I said, even like I feel pride in my sobriety now. That being said, when I'm out, if I'm at a bar, if I'm with a group of people who are all drinking, I don't want a Coke in my hand.
Yeah.
I like, they already know I don't drink, but I still want to feel like a part of, even though I'm not on the same playing field as far as drinking. I want a fancy glass in my hand, or I want an NA beer. It doesn't need to be, or else it can feel like I'm wearing a badge of like, I'm sober. And while like I'm not ashamed to admit that and say that, who wants to walk around wearing a badge?
Yeah.
You want to feel like you're a part of what everyone else is doing.
That's really what I found that I was missing. I was lucky that I didn't have cravings for alcohol. I wasn't like, oh man, I need this in this moment. It was like, I just want to be a part of this. And that comes down to small details. It comes down to having
Yeah.
something in a champagne flute on New Year's Eve. It's like having
Yeah.
something to toast with everybody when they're like doing shots. Like, even if you think about like the Instagram photo, like you look foolish if everybody has a little shot glass and you roll up with that pint glass of Coke, like just,
I'm,
it's
yeah, I'm with you.
not a photo.
I hear that with a lot of clients and a lot of people who are newly sober. They're like, I want to be able to toast with champagne at my wedding.
Mhm.
Like, well, I got married sober and I was in charge of the menu and I got like NA wine, red, white, NA champagne, and I had that toast and all the mocktails I could have wanted. I was very happy and I remembered all of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I did want to ask you how your self talk changed, A, in becoming sober, B, in becoming a therapist. And do you hear yourself in your mind talking to yourself the way that you talk to your clients?
Hmm. I still work on being as nice to myself as I am to my clients. I think we're all our own harshest critic. Um, I do think it has helped since working as a therapist. Sometimes insight is a blessing and a curse because I might be in a bad mood and I'm thinking negative things and I'll tell myself like, "Oh gosh, Kendall, like what would you say if this was a client?" And I know what I would say to the client, and I'm like, I would tell her, him or her to do that. And I'm like, but I don't want to do that. But it, jokes aside, like it has actually really helped when I get in a state or if I'm feeling negative or anxious, it makes me think of my clients and what I would say or do if it were them. And it helps me to kind of change my self talk.
What do you love about yourself?
Oh, wow. Um, I love, hmm, I'm trying to think of how I want to put it into words. I love that I'm authentic. I feel like I really try to be, and I love that I, for the most part, am unapologetically myself because for the majority of my life, that was not who I was. I was so scared to be me. And now I'm an open book. And I think what you see is what you get. And I really love that I've reached that point in my life.
That's awesome. Thanks, Kendall.
What do you love about yourself?
Um, Very similarly, the same thing. I was avoidant of who I was and what I was capable of for so long. I was using alcohol as a way of numbing the things I didn't want to deal with, but it made me
Mhm.
blind to the positive things in myself. I think a lot of people don't realize that when you're numbing one thing, you're numbing all things.
Yes.
And it was a big discovery to learn that I can be funny and I can live a life not as a cynical individual. Um, I've really felt myself become like so calm and kind in a way that I thought I was undeserving of.
Hmm.
And I love that I'm deserving of the kind calm of the world whenever I can find it.
I wish everyone felt that way. Imagine how much nicer this place would be to live.
Hopefully, we'll see that.
We will hope.
Kendall, it was really great talking to you.
Thank you. It was really great being here and speaking about all of this with you.